So let's go back to the perfect day, the perfect diet, the perfect lifestyle for 2026. So then do my resistance training at some point after I've had my breakfasts?
Well, yeah, so whatever, for me, I do body weight based exercises, so I don't like having a big belly of food. And so being in a fasted state, my view on exercising, even that's a debate. Do you exercise fasted or do you exercise with fuel? Like you take a bunch of carbs and stuff. My view is it's dependent on what your goal is. As a middle-aged guy, my goal is not performance. It's not going out and sprinting and showing power. It's to live a long, healthy life. And so it's a more metabolic focus. If your interest is metabolic, then I think exercising in a fasted state is very smart. If your goal of the exercise is performance, like you're a collegiate athlete or you're an elite rugby player or something, okay, then don't exercise fasted. Take some fuel before you go work out. So for me, I've done my early morning ruck, my personal kind of reflection time, ice bath, yerba mate, and then my mid-morning workout.
Just on that point of exercising fasted, why is that better if your goals are longevity and health?
Right, because it's just going to help you continue to burn fat and maintain your insulin sensitivity.
Okay, fine.
So I have my mid-morning workout, then I have a nice big lunch, then I have my afternoon productivity, and then I get to dinner. And dinner is the main social meal within my home. And so I have dinner with my family. And that is carte blanche. Whatever the family's eating, I'm eating. I have daughters, and as a college professor, I've seen enough young women struggle with eating disorders that I always worried, would my incessant talking about diet somehow stimulate eating disorders? And I've never wanted to become obsessive about it. And so I have dinner with my family. Whatever it is. If it's pizza, I'm having pizza. If it's pasta, I'm having pasta. Now, my wife happens to see things kind of the way I do, so it's usually meat and vegetables in some mix. And that's my dinner. And then ideally, I'm done.
What time are you having that dinner?
Yeah, that's about 5 or 6.
And you avoid eating late?
Oh, yes. In fact, I would submit, Stephen, if we were to look at any one thing someone could do, I would say anyone who says, Ben, what is the one thing? If I'm putting a question in your mouth, I'd say stop snacking in the evening. Anything you can do to not overeat and go to bed hyperglycemic or elevated or spike your blood glucose levels, do it.
Why?
That's when people are at their weakest. People, you and I could be hanging out all day, walking past a plate of cookies and not be tempted at all until 7 or 8 p.m. It's just human nature. And yet that is one of the worst times to eat it, because when you go to bed hyperglycemic, it activates a part of the nervous system, an aspect of the nervous system called the sympathetic nervous system. That's also known as the fight or flight. So when we hear a car crash right nearby, or we hear a gunshot, then immediately our heart starts beating faster and harder, our body temperature climbs, and we're stimulated. Hyperglycemia will have that effect, and that is terrible timing. Because when you're going to bed, you're wanting to rely on what's called your parasympathetic nervous system, the aspect of your nervous system that is calming. It's lowering your heart rate. It's slowing your heart. It's lowering your blood pressure. It's helping you calm down to sleep better. Hyperglycemia throws that into opposite. So then you're going to bed, you're lying there wondering why your heart is beating so hard, why you are so hot and uncomfortable, and it's because you just spiked your blood glucose with a bunch of sugar.
Is there anything else? Is there, for people that are focused on that 2026 goal of finally becoming the person that they know they can become, is there anything else you would say to them? Is there any tools they need to buy? Is there any other tricks or tactics or hacks?
Yeah. I do think that they could, if they were adopting this diet, it's definitely going to put them into ketosis. That can take a little time to adjust. So very relevant to our earlier conversation, I do think exogenous ketones can help a person transition into relying on a ketogenic diet more readily. And anytime a person's losing weight, they run the risk of losing some lean mass at the same time. And my lab just published a paper about 2 weeks ago at the time we're filming this, finding that in humans, in a weight loss protocol, if they were drinking BHB or exogenous ketones, they were able to retain more muscle mass, more lean mass in the midst of the weight loss. So there could be some strategies like that. But I would also add that there are some physical ones as well. If someone's trying to say I'm going to be the best version of myself, then start reading more. 2, read more books. You'll be the best. You'll be an even better version. As you're losing weight and your brain is firing on more cylinders than ever before as it's fueled with ketones, challenge your brain. You had mentioned dementia earlier. Ketones are a therapy for dementia, but so too is challenging your brain in the form of making it learn new things. So read a good book.
This woman contacted me on November the 11th. When you do a podcast, you get lots of feedback. You get like tens of thousands of people sometimes per episode.
And I can imagine you looking through everyone, finding the gems.
I actually, funnily enough, I do look at the comment section because it's a place where I really trust the feedback. So people that comment on these videos, like I really do trust them because they are typically listeners. They've kind of been with me on this whole journey.
Yeah.
So when they have feedback, when they have, good or bad feedback or constructive feedback, we pay attention.
Well, Stephen, I'm pleased that something brought me back. So the comments can't have been too negative.
No, they were unbelievably positive. But I got this one on LinkedIn from a lady called, I'll keep her anonymous. Let's just call her Mrs. L.
Okay.
And Mrs. L said, "Hi, Stephen, thank you for the great work you do and the information, insights, and inspiration you provide. On keto, my husband lasted 8 hours on a keto diet and was unconscious. It turned out he had a neuroendocrine cancer called insulinuria."
Oh, yeah, no, a neuroendocrine cancer called insulinoma.
I said, that's exactly what I said.
Yeah. Did I hear a niner in there? Yeah, something.
And if the paramedics hadn't intercepted with glucose, going keto would have killed him.
Yes.
He's amazing. We have 3 children and he volunteers for 50 more every weekend. We don't want to lose him.
No.
Sorry to share this sad story, but it's not the first time I've seen one of your posts or one of your guests talk about ketosis and what's worked well. And in this case, it was fatal for him.
Yes.
So I hope you don't mind, but I wanted to share this with love, respect, and kindness to hopefully give food for thought, no pun intended, of how you decide to use your platform and to provide further context and nuance.
Yeah.
What works for you and thousands of others might not work for everyone. I believe it's super important that we share this information and inspiration carefully and in a way that exemplifies a growth mindset, not a fixed mindset. For example, not a fixed one diet or one way of working for everybody. If you read this, above all else, please know I'm sending this with the utmost respect and kindness and hope. Best.
Love it. Yeah, what a thoughtful message. Yeah, it is very thoughtful. I appreciate any kind of communication, by the way, because on social media, it is so easy just to become the worst version of yourself without fear of any consequence. So she happened to describe a person who would probably be the worst individual. So an insulinoma, she describes a neuroendocrine cancer. An insulinoma is an insulin-secreting tumor. So usually it's the pancreas, which for those watching is here again. Imagine that a part of the pancreas is expanding with a tumor, but it's filled with cells that make insulin. So it's a bunch of beta cells, which are the cells that make insulin. And this is a guy who can't stop making insulin. Suffice to say, if you now cut your carbohydrate consumption and you're continuing to make tons of insulin, which is not normal. So this is very much a disease state, and I appreciate her stating it as such. It's a cancer. It's a tumor of the pancreas. So what would have happened in him, he cuts his carbohydrates, but he can't stop making insulin. So now it's actually back to that diet that I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, where the people were eating a high carb version or a low carb version of a diet. When you spike insulin, you lower both glucose and ketones. And that's what happened to him. He would have become hypoglycemic, and he would almost never make any ketones because he always has high insulin. And so he would have been depriving his brain of its 2 fuels in lowering the glucose by pushing it into muscle and fat and blocking the liver from making ketones. So he's the worst person. Anyone with an insulinoma, of course, neither you nor I are giving any medical advice, but if a person has an insulinoma, that's like the worst person to adopt a low-carb diet. They have to eat carbs because they're always making insulin. They can't stop.
What's interesting is it appears from what she's written that her husband found out that he had this.
Oh, because of adopting the diet.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's remarkable. Yeah. So a person could test this early though, Stephen. So just what you've been doing now over the past period of time by pricking your finger, if a person worried that they had an insulinoma, they could just on a random morning or fast for 12 hours or so, and measure your glucose. If you have a continuous glucose monitor, even easier, look at your glucose. Because in you and I, if we fast for 24 hours, our glucose levels stay normal. They just run along like nothing's happened. In a person with an insulinoma, they're getting lower and lower and lower and lower constantly because they can't stop making insulin, and it's always driving their blood glucose levels lower. So a person could determine that on their own. This would have been a guy who anytime he fasted at all, he would have started to feel miserable.
Because she says in the message, my husband lasted 8 hours on a keto diet and was unconscious. It turned out, which suggests that they found out.
And we hope the husband's doing well.
Yes.
Boy, an insulinoma is a big deal. My hope is that they would be able to identify the location of the tumor. And you can. What's cool about cancer is that cancer is such a sugar eater. It eats so much glucose that you can inject glucose into someone that has a little bit of radiation to it, not harmful, but then you can do an X-ray and see where does all the glucose go, and it would be going to this little lump on the pancreas, and so hopefully they can cut it out.
What does that say about cancer and sugar?
Oh my, yeah. So I know you've had the authority on this. So everything I'm about to say is me quoting Dr. Thomas Seyfried, he needs all the attention in the world as he has resurrected an almost 100-year-old view of cancer being a disease of glucose and sugar metabolism. The Warburg effect is called. But Dr. Thomas Seyfried has been a champion of bringing this view into the modern era by finding that cancer cells rely on glucose as their fuel, primarily. He also identifies glutamine. But if you can deprive the cancer cell of its fuel, normal interventions, even like chemotherapies, which have terrible rates of success, they become suddenly much more effective. In fact, part of my motivation in adhering to a ketogenic diet is cancer related. When my mom passed away from cancer as a boy, and it's been one of those diseases that's always scared me a little bit. And I think, all right, my statistical likelihood of getting a cancer in life is going to be higher than average because of a first-degree relative dying from cancer. So one of the reasons, and I've already outlived my saintly mom now, one of the reasons I adhere to a ketogenic diet is I want to do what I can to try to kill any little budding cancer cells by starving them of their glucose that they want.
I remember when we had him on the show, I remember the BBC weren't very happy that I had him on and said that it was misinformation.
Oh my gosh. Isn't that unfortunate? So he is the leading authority, I would say, in the world on cancer metabolism. And it's such a shame that his finding, and he might have explained this already, but I just want to explain to everyone as a scientist how thrilled I was to see what he'd done and how disruptive it was to the convention. And let's admit, what we think we know about cancer isn't working. Cancer rates continue to climb. Cancer mortality continues to climb. Clearly, the old views aren't working. He took tumor cells, cancer cells, and then moved over the nucleus. Because the traditional view is that it's a disease of mutations and all of these genes are in the nucleus, the kind of brain of the cell. He took the nucleus from a cancer cell, put it into a healthy cell. And then you would think, if it's a disease of the nucleus and all of those genes, mutations, this cell should have cancer now. And yet it didn't. It was a totally normal cell. It didn't matter at all that it now had the nucleus of a cancer cell. However, when he took the mitochondria from the energy factory of the cell that's so disrupted in cancer, he took the mitochondria from the cancer cell, put that into a normal cell. Now it was a cancer cell. But what a disruptive view. It proves that it's a mitochondrial problem more than a nucleus problem. And then it suggests, it adds evidence to his view and the others of us as well, that cancer is a metabolic problem.
So when publications like the BBC attack my guest for saying such a thing, or for me having him on the show and suggest that it's like misinformation or dangerous information, how do you interpret that? Because
it's so discouraging. I interpret it as we've seen echoes and shadows of this in the past 5 or 6 years with the pandemic and everything related to it, where science can be very inconvenient to various entities and institutions. And we see scientists who will compromise themselves to try to receive the funding and the adoration of those institutions and entities. But it is an attack. Science is the pursuit of truth. I was blessed to do my dissertation work, my PhD studies, with a wonderful man named Linus Dome. I will love him forever. One of the things he taught me, I'd come to him with discouraging results. The hypothesis that I'd had with regards to fat and insulin resistance, it was not supporting. The data were terrible in this particular line of experiments. And he was unflappable. He wasn't upset. He wasn't angry. He said, Ben, don't be upset. That's truth. We are seekers of truth. That's what scientists are. What a glorious thing to get paid to seek truth. It doesn't pay that well, but it's a glorious job nonetheless. That is what Dr. Thomas Seyfried is doing. And when I think you have a big entity like the BBC telling a scientist who's simply stating his own findings that have been peer-reviewed by other experts in the field, it should be beyond, it should be, he should have every platform in the world to talk about this. Every scientist ought to, and it ought to be scrutinized. Scientists should never think they know the truth. Even the declarations in the past few years of believe the science, no, that is anti-scientific. Science a scientist must be so humble that he or she is constantly prepared to dump their hypotheses if they've been shown to be wrong.
And I guess it's important for those ideas to be out there for one
yes,
to even be able to scrutinize them and challenge them.
Especially in something like cancer, where clearly what we're doing isn't working. And so let's welcome new ideas. And his evidence is incredibly compelling. It's so discouraging to hear, but it is also, Stephen, perhaps a manifestation of a broader opposition to anything low carb. You just utter the word ketone to a dogmatic and conventionally trained dietitian. Oh my gosh, you are tempting their wrath. They will. It's like the more educated a person gets, the more rigid they become from time to time in their ideas. You should never see that in a scientist. A scientist, through our training, we should be humble enough to admit that we don't know everything.
I remember when they contacted me, the journalists at the BBC, and said, we're going to write this story about, the misinformation spread by these guests.
Gosh.
And I looked at what they'd said, and and they made this little documentary and they did this article, and they had found that 0.001% of our total recorded hours of conversation and transcripts contained things that they thought could be disputed.
Oh my gosh.
And they felt with 0.001, they would write this big breaking news story in this article. And I remember thinking, that was the day that I felt I understood. That was the day that I felt I understood how the system works.
You peeked behind the curtain.
I got to see behind the curtain.
Yes.
And I was like, I thought that because it's like a big brand and I've grown up looking at it, I thought like they are so concerned about rigor and the most important thing and balance. And I said to the journalist, of what you found, 0.001, because they said you've got a right to reply. So that was my reply.
Of course, they wouldn't have published that response.
They took it out.
No,
they took my response out.
Yeah, it's too damning.
Because it was too
Yep.
And then obviously the other thing, they'd pointed at another guest that I'd had on and said, you also had this person on. And I went on, I just typed his name in and the word BBC. And they'd had him on too.
Oh my gosh.
And in fact, when he came on, this particular doctor, and he had said his points of views, the journalist at the BBC had just basically said nothing. And that was the end of the segment.
Yeah.
When he said it to me,
then all of a sudden it's a problem.
No, I read out the rebuttal from the British Heart Foundation. I read out all of the rebuttals to what he just said. But of course, the BBC published this article saying that I'd had him on. They'd had him on too. They'd never rebutted him. I did.
Yeah.
And so this was the moment that I thought,
you're becoming disruptive. To be honest,
okay.
I suspect a part of it is you are the embodiment of a new media. I think even beyond the science. So if this had been in the US, I would have speculated that a part of their concern would have been that you're platforming someone who is bad for their bottom line, because so much of the income that media outlets get in the US is from drug company ads. In the UK, you don't have that. Drug companies I don't think they're allowed to air ads on normal channels. In the UK, I think is to a degree happening everywhere. Your platform is probably bigger than many of theirs, and they might feel that's threatening.
If you love the Diary of a CEO brand and you watch this channel, please do me a huge favor. become part of the 15% of the viewers on this channel that have hit the subscribe button. It helps us tremendously, and the bigger the channel gets, the bigger the guests.